Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that might shatter everything you think you know about ancient Rome. Picture this. You're standing in the shadow of the Colosseum, the roar of 50,000 bloodthirsty spectators echoing through stone corridors. But we're not here for the glory, the combat, or the emperor's thumbs up or down. We're here for something far more primal, far more human. What did these legendary warriors eat before they faced death in the arena? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in a cramped cell in the Ludus, the Gladiator school. The stone walls are damp with Mediterranean humidity, and somewhere in the distance you can hear the rhythmic thud of wooden swords against shields. Your body aches from yesterday's brutal training session. Your ribs are bruised, your knuckles split, and there's dried blood under your fingernails that might not even be yours. But here's what Hollywood never shows you. Before you can even think about facing a lion or a fellow gladiator with a trident, there's something far more immediate demanding your attention. Your stomach. It's growling like an angry beast, reminding you that warriors, no matter how legendary, are still human. They still need fuel. And what they ate might surprise you more than any twist in a gladiator movie ever could. See, most people imagine gladiators as these meat-eating machines, gorging themselves on beef and pork, building muscle like ancient bodybuilders. The reality? It's so much stranger, so much more fascinating, and honestly, so much more brutal than anything you've seen on screen. Tonight, I'm going to reveal exactly what filled the bowls of Rome's most feared fighters. We're talking about meals that were scientifically designed not just to build muscle, but to create a very specific type of warrior. Food that was calculated, controlled, and absolutely critical to the economics of death in the arena. Because here's what they don't tell you in the history books. What a gladiator ate wasn't just about nutrition. It was about survival, politics, and profit margins written in blood and barley. We're going to explore 3 shocking discoveries that archaeologists have uncovered about gladiator diets. First, the plant that made warriors stronger than any protein powder ever could. Second, the bizarre drinking ritual that happened before every meal and why it was literally a matter of life and death. And third, the one food that was so valuable, so essential, that gladiators would kill for it. Not metaphorically, literally. But I need to warn you about something. Once you learn what these ancient warriors actually consumed, you'll never look at a protein shake the same way again. You'll understand why modern nutritionists are studying gladiator bones and completely rethinking everything we know about building muscle and endurance. This isn't just ancient history. This is a blueprint that's been buried for 2,000 years. And here's the thing that absolutely blew my mind when I first discovered this. I spent months diving through archaeological reports, bone analysis studies, and ancient Roman texts that most people will never read. What I found wasn't just surprising. It was revolutionary. These weren't random meals thrown together by whoever was running the kitchen. Every single bite was calculated by Roman physicians and trainers who understood human performance in ways that would make modern sports scientists jealous. The Ludus, where gladiators lived, wasn't just a training ground. It was a laboratory. And the breakfast they ate? It was the first experiment of the day. Now, before we dive into the first shocking ingredient, I need you to forget everything you think you know about ancient Roman food. Forget the movie scenes of gladiators tearing into massive hunks of meat. Forget the images of warriors chugging wine before battle. Because the truth is so much more complex, so much more intelligent, and frankly, so much more effective than anything Hollywood has ever shown you. The Roman Empire didn't become the most powerful civilization in history by accident. They were systematic about everything, including how they fed their most valuable entertainment assets. And make no mistake, that's exactly what gladiators were. Assets, investments, walking, breathing profit margins that needed to be maintained, optimized, and kept alive long enough to fill the Colosseum with screaming crowds. So, when you're thinking about gladiator nutrition, you're not thinking about personal choice or cultural preference. You're thinking about military precision applied to human performance. Every meal was designed by people who understood that the difference between a gladiator who lives to fight another day and one who becomes lion food might come down to what he ate that morning. The gladiator schools of Rome employed doctors, nutritionists, and trainers whose job was to create the perfect fighting machine, not through steroids or supplements, but through food, ancient food, simple food, food that was so effective, so perfectly calibrated that it kept men alive in an arena designed to kill them. And the breakfast? That was where it all began, because a gladiator who started his day wrong might not live to see sunset. But here's where it gets really interesting. The food wasn't just about physical performance. It was about psychology, about creating a specific mindset, about building warriors who could function under pressure that would break most people. The Romans understood something that we're only beginning to rediscover, that what you eat doesn't just fuel your body. It shapes your mind, your emotions, your ability to face death without flinching. So, as we're about to uncover these 3 shocking discoveries about gladiator breakfast, I want you to think about this. These men were eating to die well. Not to live long, comfortable lives, but to perform spectacularly in moments of absolute terror. That changes everything about how you approach nutrition. The first discovery is going to challenge everything you believe about protein and muscle building. The second will make you question every sports drink you've ever consumed. And the third? The third discovery is so bizarre, so counterintuitive, that when archaeologists first found the evidence, they thought they had made a mistake. They hadn't. What they had found was proof that the ancient world understood human performance in ways that we're only beginning to comprehend. Ways that could revolutionize how we think about food, training, and what it really takes to perform when everything is on the line. So, let's step into that stone cell, let's feel the weight of leather armor, let's smell the olive oil and sweat and fear that filled those corridors, because we're about to discover that the most feared warriors in human history weren't built on meat and wine. They were built on something far more surprising, something that was sitting right there in front of historians for centuries, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the right question. What did gladiators really eat for breakfast? The answer is about to change everything you think you know about ancient Rome, about nutrition, and about what it really takes to build a warrior. Now, imagine you're that gladiator, sitting in the communal dining area of the ludus as the first pale light of dawn creeps through the narrow windows. Your fellow fighters are stirring around you, some nursing wounds from yesterday's training, others staring blankly at the stone walls, knowing that today might be their last. The air is thick with tension, sweat, and something else, the smell of breakfast being prepared. But this isn't the hearty meal you'd expect. No sizzling bacon, no chunks of roasted meat, no warrior's feast fit for men about to face death. Instead, what's placed in front of you is a bowl of something that looks more like peasant food than fuel for Rome's most elite fighters. It's barley. Plain, simple barley. And here's where everything you think you know about gladiator nutrition falls apart completely. Because this wasn't just any barley. This was barley prepared in a very specific way, mixed with very specific ingredients, consumed at very specific times. The Romans had turned this humble grain into something approaching a science. Recent bone analysis of Gladiator remains found in a cemetery in Ephesus revealed something that shocked modern nutritionists. These warriors had extremely high levels of strontium and calcium in their bones. At first, researchers thought this meant gladiators were drinking milk, eating cheese, consuming the kind of dairy-rich diet you'd expect from men who needed strong bones for combat. They were wrong. The calcium was coming from the barley, but not just any barley. Barley that had been deliberately mixed with wood ash. Yes, you heard that right. Wood ash. The Romans were essentially creating an ancient calcium supplement by mixing burned plant matter into their grain porridge. It sounds insane until you realize it's actually genius. Wood ash contains massive amounts of calcium carbonate, the same compound found in modern calcium supplements. But the Romans didn't understand chemistry the way we do. They just knew that gladiators who ate ash barley had stronger bones, faster healing, and could take more punishment in training without breaking. Think about that for a moment. 2,000 years before we invented vitamin D supplements and calcium pills, Roman trainers had figured out how to create super soldiers using nothing but grain and fireplace waste. They were literally eating the remains of burned wood to become better killers. But the barley itself was just the beginning. Because gladiators weren't just eating plain porridge. They were consuming what the Romans called gladiator barley, a specific mixture that was so important, so central to gladiator culture, that they earned the nickname hordeari, barley men. Now, you might be thinking, that doesn't sound very intimidating. Barley men doesn't exactly strike fear into the hearts of your enemies. But here's what modern sports science is only beginning to understand. Barley is one of the most perfect endurance foods ever discovered. It's packed with complex carbohydrates that provide sustained energy. It's rich in beta-glucan, a fiber that helps regulate blood sugar and keeps energy levels stable for hours. More importantly, barley contains compounds that help with muscle recovery and reduce inflammation. When you're training 6 hours a day with wooden swords and shields, when you're taking hits that would hospitalize a modern athlete, you need food that helps your body repair itself overnight. Barley does exactly that, but the Romans took it even further. They didn't just cook the barley, they fermented it. They would soak the grains for days, allowing natural bacteria to break down the starches and create a kind of ancient energy drink. This fermentation process not only made the nutrients more bioavailable, it also created beneficial bacteria that helped with digestion and immune function. Remember, these men were living in close quarters, sharing cells, training together, eating together. Disease could wipe out an entire gladiator school in weeks. The fermented barley wasn't just fuel, it was medicine. And here's where it gets really interesting. The Romans understood something about timing that modern athletes are only rediscovering. They didn't just eat barley, they ate it at very specific times, in very specific amounts, based on when they were fighting. On training days, gladiators would consume their barley porridge before dawn, mixed with olive oil for fat and honey for quick energy. The combination provided both immediate fuel and sustained energy for hours of brutal physical training. But on fight days, on the days when they would actually enter the arena, the meal was different. Fight day breakfast was smaller, easier to digest, designed not to weigh them down, but to provide steady energy without causing stomach upset. Because nothing ruins a gladiatorial performance quite like vomiting in front of 50,000 spectators. The Romans had essentially created the world's first sports nutrition program, 2 millennia before we had any scientific understanding of metabolism, glycogen, or muscle recovery. They were doing it purely through observation and trial and error. And it worked so well that gladiators trained on this diet could fight multiple times per week, recover from injuries that should have ended their careers, and maintain peak physical condition for years. But the barley was just the foundation, because mixed into that grain porridge were other ingredients that would make your modern nutritionist weep with joy. Ingredients that the Romans considered essential, not optional. Ingredients that turned a simple bowl of grain into a warrior's breakfast. And that brings us to the second shocking discovery. The ritual that happened before every single meal, without exception, that had nothing to do with religion and everything to do with staying alive. Every gladiator, before touching a single spoonful of food, would drink a mixture that sounds absolutely revolting to modern ears. But this mixture was so important, so critical to gladiator survival, that refusing to drink it was grounds for punishment, possibly even death. What was in this mixture? What could be so important that men facing lions and tigers would never skip it? And why did Roman physicians consider it more valuable than any medicine in their arsenal? The answer is going to make you question everything you think you know about ancient hygiene and modern health supplements. Because this daily ritual wasn't just about nutrition. It was about creating warriors who were immune to the very thing that killed more gladiators than any sword or wild animal ever could: disease. The mixture they drank was bone broth. But not just any bone broth. This was bone broth that had been simmered for days, sometimes weeks, until the bones literally dissolved into the liquid. The Romans called it ius osseum, and it was thick, gelatinous, and packed with minerals that would make modern supplement companies weep with envy. But here's what made it truly revolutionary. They weren't just using any bones. They were using the bones of animals that had died from specific causes. Healthy animals that had been slaughtered quickly, not animals that had died from disease or old age. The Romans understood, without knowing the science behind it, that the quality of the bone determined the quality of the broth. And they took it even further. Into this bone broth, they would mix something that sounds absolutely disgusting, but was actually brilliant. Vinegar. Lots of vinegar. The acid helped extract even more minerals from the bones, creating a drink that was essentially liquid calcium, magnesium, and collagen. Modern research has shown that this combination is almost identical to what we now know are the perfect ratios for bone health and muscle recovery. The Romans had accidentally created the most effective joint supplement in human history, using nothing but animal bones, vinegar, and thyme. But the bone broth served another purpose that was even more important than nutrition. It was their defense against the gladiator school's greatest enemy, not wild animals or opposing fighters, but contaminated water. Rome's aqueduct system was impressive, but it wasn't perfect. Water that traveled miles through stone channels and sat in cisterns could harbor bacteria that would kill you faster than any gladius. The bone broth, with its high acidity from the vinegar and beneficial compounds from the bones, acted as a natural antibiotic. Gladiators who drank their daily bone broth rarely got sick. Those who skipped it often died not from combat injuries, but from dysentery, cholera, and other waterborne diseases that could wipe out entire barracks. The trainers knew this, even if they didn't understand the mechanism. That's why drinking the bone broth wasn't optional, it was survival. And here's where it gets really fascinating. The bone broth wasn't just consumed in the morning. Gladiators would drink smaller amounts throughout the day, especially after training sessions. The collagen and amino acids helped with muscle recovery, while the minerals replaced what was lost through sweat during those brutal 6-hour training sessions. But the timing was crucial. They never drank bone broth immediately before eating solid food. The Romans had discovered that consuming liquid nutrients first, then waiting about 30 minutes before eating grain, maximized absorption. Modern sports nutritionists call this nutrient timing, and it's considered cutting-edge science. The Romans were doing it 2,000 years ago because they noticed that gladiators who followed this pattern performed better and recovered faster. The bone broth ritual also served a psychological purpose. In a world where death was always one mistake away, having a daily routine that never changed provided stability. It was a moment of calm before the storm, a reminder that they were still human beings, not just killing machines. But the most shocking thing about the bone broth wasn't what was in it. It was how it was prepared. Because the Romans had discovered something about heat and time that modern chefs are only beginning to understand. They cooked their bone broth in special bronze cauldrons that were never completely emptied. Every day, new bones and water were added to the existing broth, creating a perpetual stew that some ludists claimed had been cooking continuously for decades. The oldest, most successful gladiator schools took pride in their ancient broths, some of which were supposedly started by legendary trainers and had been passed down through generations. This perpetual cooking method created layers of flavor and nutrition that would be impossible to achieve with a single batch. The minerals from thousands of bones, concentrated over years of slow simmering, created a liquid that was so nutrient-dense it was almost medicine. And here's something that will blow your mind. Recent analysis of bronze cauldrons found in gladiator schools has revealed trace amounts of dozens of different minerals, some of which modern nutritionists are only now recognizing as essential for peak athletic performance. The Romans weren't just making bone broth, they were creating a complex mineral supplement that would cost hundreds of dollars to replicate today. But even with their scientifically perfect barley porridge and mineral-rich bone broth, gladiators were still missing something. Something so crucial, so absolutely essential, that without it, all the other nutrition in the world wouldn't matter. This brings us to the third and most shocking discovery. The food that gladiators would literally kill for. The ingredient that was so valuable, so tightly controlled, that it was often used as currency within the gladiator schools. And when I tell you what it was, you're going to think I'm lying. Because this food, this absolutely critical component of the gladiator diet, is something that most modern athletes actively avoid. Something that fitness influencers tell you will ruin your gains and destroy your performance. But for Roman gladiators, it was life itself. The third essential component of every gladiator's breakfast was fat. Not just any fat, but very specific types of fat that were so carefully rationed, so precisely distributed, that gladiators would sometimes fight each other just for an extra spoonful. We were talking about olive oil, yes, but also rendered animal fat from very specific sources, bear fat when they could get it. Wild boar fat was considered premium. But the most prized, the most valuable fat in any gladiator school came from an animal that most people today would never consider food: seal fat. Now, you might be wondering how Roman gladiators were getting seal fat when seals don't exactly populate the Mediterranean. The answer reveals just how sophisticated and far-reaching the gladiator nutrition system really was. The Romans were importing seal fat from the northern edges of their empire, from Britain and Gaul, specifically to feed their most valuable fighters. Why seal fat? Because the Romans had discovered something that modern nutritionists call omega-3 fatty acids, though they obviously didn't know the scientific name. They just knew that gladiators who consumed seal fat had better reflexes, faster healing, and could take more punishment without suffering permanent damage. Modern analysis of seal fat shows it contains some of the highest concentrations of DHA and EPA omega-3s found in any natural source. These fatty acids are crucial for brain function, inflammation control, and muscle recovery. The Romans were essentially giving their gladiators natural brain enhancers and anti-inflammatory drugs, 2,000 years before we understood what those compounds actually did. But here's what made the fat situation truly brutal. It wasn't distributed equally. The amount and quality of fat you received depended entirely on your status within the gladiator hierarchy. New recruits, prisoners of war, and slaves got the bare minimum, usually just a small amount of olive oil mixed into their barley. Veteran gladiators, the crowd favorites, the ones who brought in the most money, they got the premium fats. They got the seal fat, the bear fat, sometimes even imported butter from Gaul. And the gladiators at the very top of the hierarchy, the ones whose names were known throughout the empire, they got something even more valuable. They got to choose their own fat portions. This might not sound like much, but in a world where every aspect of your life was controlled by others, where you owned nothing and had no freedom, being able to choose how much fat you ate was a form of power. It was recognition that you had value beyond just being a disposable fighter. And the gladiators knew it. Fat portions were the source of more violence within gladiator schools than any other issue. More fights broke out over stolen olive oil than over training disputes or personal conflicts. Because fat wasn't just nutrition. It was status, power, and survival all rolled into one greasy, precious substance. The Romans had figured out something that modern science is only beginning to understand. Fat isn't just fuel, it's medicine. The right fats, consumed in the right amounts, can literally change how your body responds to stress, injury, and fatigue. And in an environment where stress, injury, and fatigue were daily realities, fat was the difference between a gladiator who lasted years and one who died in his first few fights. But the fat served another purpose that was just as important as nutrition. It was used as a training tool. Gladiator trainers would increase or decrease fat rations based on performance. Fight well in practice, get extra olive oil with dinner. Slack off during training, lose your fat portion for the day. This created a powerful psychological conditioning system. Gladiators would push themselves to exhaustion, not just for glory or survival, but for that extra spoonful of bear fat that would help their muscles recover overnight. And here's the most shocking part. The Romans understood that different types of fat did different things. They weren't just randomly feeding gladiators whatever fat was available. They had a system. Olive oil for daily maintenance and energy, animal fats for muscle building and recovery, seal fat for brain function and reflexes. And for gladiators recovering from serious injuries, they had something special, something that modern doctors are only now rediscovering as a miracle treatment. Fish oil. Not from just any fish, but from specific deep-water fish that had to be caught in the Atlantic and transported hundreds of miles to Rome. This fish oil was so valuable that it was literally worth more than gold by weight. But it worked. Gladiators recovering from severe injuries who were given fish oil supplements healed faster, had less scarring, and were able to return to fighting weeks earlier than those who didn't receive it. The Romans had accidentally discovered what we now know as one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory compounds in nature, and they were using it to keep their most valuable assets fighting longer, earning more money, and putting on better shows. So, when we talk about gladiator breakfast, we're not just talking about a meal. We're talking about a sophisticated nutritional system that was designed to create the perfect fighting machine. Barley for sustained energy and bone strength, bone broth for mineral replacement and disease prevention, and carefully rationed fats for recovery, brain function, and psychological control. It was a system so effective, so perfectly calibrated, that it kept men alive in an arena designed to kill them. And it was all accomplished using nothing but ancient ingredients and careful observation. But there's one more element to the gladiator breakfast that we haven't discussed yet. Something that tied all these ingredients together and made them work as a complete system. Something that was so important, so fundamental to gladiator nutrition, that without it, everything else would have been worthless. And this final element is going to completely change how you think about meal timing, digestion, and what it really means to fuel your body for peak performance. That final element was silence. Every single gladiator meal began and ended in complete, absolute silence. No conversation, no jokes, no complaints about the food. Just the sound of wooden spoons scraping against clay bowls, and the rhythmic chewing of men who understood that this might be their last meal, but this wasn't some religious ritual or sign of respect. This was pure, calculated psychology. The Romans had discovered that how you eat affects how you digest, and how you digest affects how you perform. And for gladiators, performance wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about living or dying. Modern science calls it the parasympathetic nervous system. When you're calm, relaxed, and focused, your body diverts energy toward digestion, nutrient absorption, and recovery. When you're stressed, angry, or distracted, that same energy gets redirected toward fight or flight responses, and your food basically becomes worthless. The Romans didn't know the science, but they knew the results. Gladiators who ate in silence, who took their time, who focused completely on the act of consuming their carefully prepared nutrition, performed better in training, and survived longer in the arena. But the silence served another purpose that was even more important. It was the last moment of peace these men would have before facing death. In those quiet minutes, spooning ash-enriched barley into their mouths, sipping mineral-rich bone broth, they weren't gladiators. They weren't entertainment. They weren't property. They were just human beings eating breakfast. And perhaps that's the most shocking discovery of all. That, in a system designed to strip away everything human, everything individual, everything personal. The Romans understood that nutrition wasn't just about the body. It was about the mind, the spirit, the part of a person that no amount of training or brutality could completely control. The gladiator breakfast wasn't just fuel for fighting. It was a daily reminder that survival was possible, that the body could be strengthened, that tomorrow might come after all. So the next time you grab a protein shake or energy bar, remember this. 2,000 years ago, in stone cells beneath the Colosseum, men who faced death for entertainment understood something we've forgotten, that what you eat isn't just about nutrition. It's about respect. Respect for your body, respect for the day ahead, and respect for the simple act of being alive. The gladiators of Rome ate barley, bone broth, and carefully rationed fats, not because they wanted to, but because it kept them alive long enough to earn their freedom. They ate in silence, not because they were forbidden to speak, but because they understood that some moments are too important for words. And maybe, just maybe, that ancient wisdom is exactly what we need to remember, that every meal is a choice, every bite is an opportunity, and every moment of quiet focus is a victory against the chaos of the world. The gladiators are gone. The Colosseum is empty, but their breakfast? That perfect combination of ancient grains, mineral-rich broth, and sacred fats consumed in reverent silence. That recipe for warriors still works. It's still waiting. And it's still teaching us that sometimes the most powerful things in life are also the simplest. Because in the end, whether you're facing lions in an arena or just trying to make it through another day, the question remains the same. How will you fuel the fight?